Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2010 dystopian romantic tragedy movie titled Never Let Me Go. Now, Never Let Me Go runs for 1 hour and 43 minutes long. It is directed by Mark Romanek. The script was written by Alex Garland. It is produced by Andrew McDonald and Alan Reich. It is based off of the novel, also titled Never Let Me Go, by Kazuo Ishiguro. It is composed by Rachel Portman, the cinematography by Adam Kimmel, and it was edited by Barney Pilling. And the stars of the movie are Carey Mulligan, Keira Knightley, Andrew Garfield, also playing the role of the younger versions of Mulligan, Knightley, and Garfield are Isobel Meikle-Small, Ella Purnell, and Charlie Rowe. Joining the ranks of the supporting characters, we have Sally Hawkins, we have Charlotte Rampling, Nathalie Richard, Domhnall Gleeson, and Andrea Riseborough. Oh boy, this movie really is quite something. And it's really tugs at your emotions very impactfully. And it's not actually for the better, to be honest with you. Adapted to the screen based on Kazuo Ishiguro's 2005 novel, with a script written by Andrew Garland and directed by music video director Mark Romanek. People thought that Never Let Me Go was going to avoid any kind of spoilers and just let the narrative flow naturally without spoon-feeding anything at us, so we could feel free to draw our own conclusions. Well, that concept was sadly thrown out the window quite fast. In fact, in the first 10 minutes of the movie, we're pretty much all told what was happening without any apology of giving away too much results, which results in anything that's suspenseful. Everything was told at you. There was no mystery. Everything was just spoon-fed us. Almost to a point where, why are we still continuing to watch this movie? If you want me to be blunt about the overall outcome of Never Let Me Go, let's just say it's melancholy, chatty, and runs at a turtle's pace. In other words, those who have short attention spans, maybe you may want to avoid this one. Because even though the movie is an hour and 43 minutes long, which is reasonable in its length, it sometimes feels more like it could be a 2 hour and 30 minute long movie. Yeah, it really does feel that way. It's kind of a bit laboring to watch. Maybe because it might be so over the top in its sadness and its depression, or maybe even after watching this movie, I felt like I needed to watch something to make me laugh just to hopefully regain or rectify my sanity. Maybe that's what it was. But it really got to me. And if I would have not watched anything funny after, I probably would have just went to bed crying, because this movie will make you cry. This movie will make you sad. Because this movie, it does not have a happy ending. In fact, it ends in deep tragedy. As an author, Kazuo Ishiguro is a very decorated writer who in 1989 was the winner of the Booker Prize for his 1989 novel Remains of the Day, among other accolades including the 2017 Nobel Prize for Literature. In fact, in 1993, Remains of the Day, like Never Let Me Go, would also get adapted to the screen by the Merchant Ivory collaboration, and it stars big names like Sir Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. And although Remains of the Day was strictly a dramatic film, I asked myself, where does the sci-fi fit into the narrative of Never Let Me Go? The movie also was supposed to have some kind of sci-fi elements to it, but you never really see it or really ever acknowledge it. Because to be honest with you, it virtually hardly exists. And if there is a science fiction story in the narrative, it's put way into the background. And science fiction doesn't necessarily have to be aliens or little green men or shooting lasers at people or things like that. No, not nothing in the slightest. You could have a sci-fi story with some drama into the narrative. Into their narrative. But as a whole, you don't really get much science fiction in this movie. It's basically just a story of romance, tragedy, depression, and dystopia. That's the main priorities you find in this movie. Very little is emphasized on science fiction. And is that a bad thing? It's not that great because it's misleading. Prior to directing the movie, Mark Romanek directed the very obscure 1985 film Static and the more highly prolific 2002 creepy thriller 1 Hour Photo, which starred the late Robin Williams. Romanek, for most of his filmmaking career, was directing music videos from top-of-the-line artists like Madonna, Michael Jackson, R.E.M., and David Bowie. You can't get bigger names than that. But here we have Romanek taking us on a journey to England in which an amazing medical breakthrough has proceeded, which will likely have an impact on humans for the rest of their lives. So the story goes something like this. In 1952, scientists had found a miracle cure to erase all deadly diseases, and now humans are guaranteed that they can live past the age of 100 by the year 1967. That sounds kind of utopian if you ask me. When all diseases will be cured, and we could actually live a lot more longer. But of course, this movie is anything but utopian. In fact, it's the opposite. It's completely dystopian. Maybe not for the human race, but for the people behind the human race who can now live 100 years. The people who actually are using the resources to ensure that people will live 100 years, well, they're not getting that utopia. In fact, they're getting completely dystopic. And although it's billed as a sci-fi film, the settings are anything but. It's colorless, generic, and doesn't look or feel dystopic, and doesn't look or feel utopian in any way at all. Well, it doesn't feel that dystopian either. But we also learn to reveal that it's a lot more dystopian than we could imagine. So the main setting of this film is at a boarding school called Hailsham, located in the English countryside. And in the opening scene, we see children placed in their chairs like something taken out of a Charles Dickens novel. Now, the setting in this movie is not in the 19th century, although it could probably easily feel like it was set there, because it's like all the children are like, well, Hailsham is a boarding school, and of course, everybody wears uniforms on the school grounds. Maybe off the school grounds, you could dress more casually. But the school, like, it may be set in the year 1978. It did feel more like time stopped in this dystopian background. If it was set in 1978, the opening scenes. Of course, this movie follows through 3 different time periods. But the opening scene was actually set in 1978, but it felt more like it was set maybe in the 30s or 40s. The way the kids dressed, the way the kids acted, the way the kids behaved. You think that people behaved the way in 1978 than compared to the way they did in the late 19th or even early years of the 20th century? No. What's amazingly unsettling about this movie is that the children are all very compliant to the weird draconian measures that were brought up by the school administration. I mean, they're taught basically stuff that is not conventionally, that kind of like defies the education system of the things that we learn in school, like the basic fundamentals, like reading and spelling and arithmetic and art and science and everything else in between. The physical sciences like phys ed and science, and the social science subjects like history and geography. No, they're not really teach that at all. And the thing is that the children don't know what they're getting themselves into or what they got themselves into. They just pretty much obey and go about their ways of life without very much of a fight or very much of a conflict or even in any way, shape, or form in a rebel. Everything that the children do is all compliant, agreeable, and acceptable. And the way the school administrations run these things, they're not afraid to adjust to these rules and find them all completely justified, even though we as an audience know that's anything but. One of the main things that I've noticed strange was when the kids were playing ball, the ball went a little bit over the fence, just over the fence. But instead of climbing over the fence just to retrieve the ball and then coming back down and continue their game, they left the ball over the fence. Because apparently the principal said that if the children should leave the vicinity of the boarding school, they will succumb to a horrible fate. The children who reside at this facility just so happen to be not human beings at all. They are clones. And they were put there, and they were put in this school as a way that while the non-clones will be able to live a long, fruitful life past the age of 100, and while the non-clones, that real humans, can do any profession he or she wishes to pursue in, whether it be a doctor or an astronaut or a construction worker or a firefighter. Nope. These children who reside at Hailsham are clones, and they're only going to be able to do two jobs. They're either going to be carers or organ donors. That's right, they're going to donate their organs to these non-clones so that the real humans can live a long life, but the clone children at Hailsham, well, their time is limited. Very, very limited. In fact, they might be so limited that they're probably never going to experience the privileges that we humans pursue. You know, to live, to have our own jobs, our opportunities, our freedoms, our liberations. But the children here don't have those pleasures. They're not going to be able to procreate and create and have children of their own. They're not going to, have the jobs choices that they have. They were only there for two reasons, to either be carers or donors. And they're also not going to live very long. What's the average age? They're probably going to live maybe at the most, maybe up to their mid-20s, maybe, if they're lucky. And like I mentioned before, it was all blurted out in the opening 10 minutes of the movie, so all the suspense is expunged. I mean, Sally Hawkins' character, Miss Emily, blurts it out. And then once she does that, you never see her again. The plot of the movie was inspired from the 1979 film The Clonus Horror, which would eventually be bloated by a Michael Bay directed film in 2005 called The Island. So a lot of ideas had come from both the novel, even though probably more or less The Clonus Horror than The Island. But of course, the directing may probably have taken some ideas from the Michael Bay movie. So without taking out any surprises, the movie concentrates on the dramatic tensions of three saddened youths over the staged period of their lives between 1978, 1985, and 1994. So the main focus is around three classmates. We have the loving, caring Kathy, played by Isobel Meikle-Small, and then later by Carey Mulligan. The fragile Tommy, played by Charlie Rowe, and then as the older kid, played by Andrew Garfield, and the scheming Ruth, played by Ella Purnell, and then later Keira Knightley. They eventually begin a love triangle that leads to love, jealousy, and betrayal, and reconciliation, which eventually leads to their unfortunate completions at the end. What I mean by completions, they do meet tragic fate. In the year 1978, Kathy eventually starts to befriend Tommy after Tommy was kind of like bullied around. Kathy has, of course, this great nurturing nature towards her, but she also remains friends with Ruth, but then it's all taken away. Eventually Tommy gives, there was also a time some gentleman who walked in offering them gifts, which was basically just a bunch of broken toys or hand-me-down clothes. But however, Tommy offers a gift to Kathy, which was a cassette, and playing on the cassette was the song Never Let Me Go, which was, of course, the theme song for this movie, hence the title. But then eventually, Ruth decided to take it upon her to be an opportunist, and she eventually manipulates Tommy, her affection, and they eventually start to become more involved with each other, much to the chagrin of Kathy. And Tommy and Ruth were starting to form into a couple, even though they were still relatively young at age. And then we cut to 1985, where they moved from their facility in Halesome. They're now adolescents, and they're now residing in some cottage, along with two other possible clones. One of them is named Andrew, I believe his name was played by Domhnall Gleeson, and another girl named Chrissy, played by Andrea Riseborough. And because of the fact that the leading trifecta of Kathy, Tommy, and Ruth had all lived in a rather secluded place in Halesome, where they never left the school premises and never really experienced very much things in their life. But then they started to get exposed to more things, including watching television shows and sitcoms. And instead of, just watching it for relaxation, they seem to be more watching it for more observatory ways how people live and interact with each other, thinking that what they see on TV, whether it be fiction or non-fiction, they think that everything that's seen on TV is the way how people really do interact with each other. And then there's also scenes where Tommy and Ruth are having sex, and Kathy is perusing through Playboy magazines, not just to adorn to her horny thoughts, but mostly for observation and to see what really happens. She's basically more not just casually reading a Playboy magazine, but actually studying it. Now, you would think that would kind of be inappropriate to watch and to view, but if you really understand, like I said before, Kathy, Tommy, and Ruth have lived a very sheltered life before that, so they don't really know what the fuck is happening. And yeah, there was also talks that that Andrew says to the two girls and Tommy that that even though they know their time on Earth is limited, there is a possibility that there could be a deferral, which could ensure them that they could probably live a little bit longer than their expectancy. But of course, also the cottage where they were staying also revealed some dark hidden truths. Like when they walked past a tavern and you see a girl eating. The girl looks out the window and she just notices that this girl was a very, very close resemblance to Ruth. And Ruth, when she sees this, is taken aback, even though she's kind of in denial that that can't possibly be her, when really it's revealed that this woman happens to actually be Ruth. And this is the non-clone version of Ruth. Ruth sees this and she's like almost like breaking down. And she does break down. In some ways, you may not necessarily like Ruth because she was a sneaky opportunist, but in this part, you actually do take some level of sympathy towards her. You know, this is some pretty intense stuff here. And then we cut to 1994, where Carey has made it her decision to end up becoming a carer for these clones during the time when they have to go through the medical procedures so that they can start their donating and giving their donations to non-clones so that they can live to be centurions. Kathy is reunited with Ruth, who isn't doing too well. I mean, she's done something like her third completion, and obviously she's now being forced to hang on by a walker for support because obviously she's too weak to walk around too much. She's frail, she's gaunt, she's colorless. Meanwhile, Tommy, who has done 2 completions, seems to be in a little more better health, or seems to be doing quite alright. They decide to go to a beach, and, you know, Ruth comes clean and admits that she was done herself wrong by taking advantage over Tommy and apologizes. And then, of course, later it's revealed that Ruth eventually has done her final completion and is now dead. I mean, I think the real climax of the story is when the adult or the adolescent versions of Kathy, Tommy, and Ruth go to the cottages once they reach their teens, and they begin to realize what is in store for them, as they understand perfectly clear that their time on Earth is limited. And while this is happening, Ruth unveils the truth regarding the triangle between her, Tommy, and Kathy, which ends the friendship, and Kathy runs away to become a carer. Meanwhile, Tommy thinks that by taking up an art career, this may be his way of deferral to the horrid life that was given to him and all the other boarding school children. He thinks that this deferral by taking up art would be a way to show that he is for real and that his love for Kathy is real and genuine, and maybe the professors or the schoolmasters at the boarding school, could give him that deferral. Because when they were at Hailsham, they were given, the opportunities to draw pictures. The school in Hailsham did not, they weren't abusive in their power. There was no red butts or broken knuckles or anything like that. None of the teachers came across as being overbearing and psychopathic. No, they were treated well, but they still also had to comply to many restrictions, and they did so without conflict or a fight. There really was hardly any fights or conflicts with in other people. If they were conflicted, it would be towards themselves. You know, whether it be Tommy being a self-loathing individual, or Ruth realizing that what is going on isn't going to work out well for her in the end, which it unfortunately didn't. So as 1994 rolls on, Ruth is not with us anymore. Kathy and Tommy show up at the place where the headmaster, Charlotte Rampling's there, and the madame, who I believe was the headmistress. Tommy shows them his work, and they were like, "Why are you showing this to me?" Because my true love of Kathy is pure and genuine, and that we would like to have a deferral so that we can live a little bit longer, so I can live out my life for the next couple of years, so I can be with my true love for a much longer period than what I have now. But then she looks at him and says, "Sorry, not gonna happen." You see, the reason why they drew these pictures wasn't because of true love. They drew the pictures to put in the gallery to show if these clones happen to actually even have souls, a personality, or even a certain level of consciousness. So all of his drawings in the end turn out to be null and void. There is no deferral. He's going to die whether he wants to admit it or not. Yes, I know the human race, we all die. Everything that is born, lives, will eventually die. He just didn't want it to go so soon. And that's eventually what happened. So while Tommy gets the news that there is no deferral, he takes his art, he goes outside, and he lets out a loud, thunderous scream, while Kathy tries to do everything in her best capacity to console him. Eventually, Tommy completes his donating, and he's dead. And then Kathy eventually has to end up living the rest of her life as a carer without a love in the world. You see, not even these clones, these children, didn't even have parents. There was no visitations or anything like that. Once you get indoctrinated into this Hale Sim school, it's for life. Yes, eventually the Hale Sim school eventually closed down. But, this is really, really, really heavy-handed stuff, I tell you. The climax really starts to really kick off in 1994, as things take a tragic turn for the worst of these three youths, as their donations have caused them to get weaker and sick. Two of the three main characters meet their fate, and the one remaining member is soon to become completed too. This one really makes you bawl your eyes out in tears. In the novel, Kathy actually does mention that, just like non-clones, everybody seems to somewhat await their moment on death row. We don't like to think about it, but I guess in a way what she makes sense. Anything that lives will die. And that the reason why we do all these things, whether it be for work, whether it be for leisure, or whether it be just for our routine ways of life, we all prepare and embrace ourselves because our time will draw. Maybe not for a short while or a long while, but we will eventually meet our fate somewhere in the unforeseeable future. And we also have no choice but to comply and accept. We don't want to, but we have to. And I think that's kind of like what it kind of like gets at. And while sure the clones don't have the privileges that the non clones are facing, they too may probably live past the age of 100, but they're not going to be guaranteed to live eternally. The real weakness to this movie isn't, the acting or the directing or anything like that. But it's just that there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered, and sometimes the logic seems to be missing in the movie. I mean, if the pupils are depicted in this movie are just clones raised simply as organ donors and nothing more, why do they need a decent education? Why couldn't they go out in the world like everyone else? I mean, if I'm not going to have the dreams that I want to be when I grow up, why am I even still stuck in a classroom? It's so harmful and draconian in nature where they come from. The worst case is that even though these leads try to fight the system, in the end, for most of the film, they didn't really put much of a conflict at all. Either because they were too young to fully understand what was happening, or maybe they were indoctrinated to be like, you will be a donor or a carer and you will be happy. They just simply comply with the rules without thought or doubt. And though the dramatic tension skipped through many years, the climax is quite unsatisfying and just closes way too soon. Sure, Never Let Me Go is a provocative movie, and like I said before, the acting from the three leads and even the kid actors also try to copy and emulate the images of the principal cast of Keira Knightley, Andrew Garfield, and Carey Mulligan. There's still, and it's also has some very, very, very highly philosophical intentions too. I'm sure it will have a few fans intrigued by the story and what it has to offer. And if you're a fan of this movie, the more power to you. It's just that this book was one of those that shouldn't have been adapted to a movie, I'm afraid. And though it seems more focused on the love story, which was tragic in itself, the science fiction side to the story is pretty much demoted to just an afterthought. I mean, we never really ever think that these leading characters are actually clones. And sure, it's pretty mature behind it. The sentimentality can be a bit overkill at times. Yeah, this movie will surely make you depressed in the end. And I know most people who go to movies want to go to enjoy themselves, but every so often we will run into a movie where you can't simply enjoy yourself because it just makes you think, but at the same time it also makes you sad and depressed in the end. And most people don't want to go to watch a movie just to be sad and depressed. But eventually, sadly, movies like this do come along. So if you didn't like this movie, I don't blame you. If you liked the movie and thought it was intriguing and stuff like that, which it was, the more power to you as well. It just didn't sit very well for me. I didn't really recommend it too much. So therefore, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give Never Let Me Go a 5.5 out of 10. I know that's very low, but it just didn't sit very well with me, I'm afraid. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I'll be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Wright Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.